All right, welcome to quarantine coffee question. What are we on? Number 3. This came from a comment in the last video down in the bottom, and the comment was about what makes a coffee. What is a espresso roast? What's a coffee made for espresso? So I'm going to actually show you my coffee setup, and then I'll give you a little bit of maybe a better understanding what makes a good coffee for espresso. So the question had to do with the coffee, and I think you got to understand what you're doing with an espresso machine versus, say, a pour over. All right, here's the portafilter. All right, and inside the portafilter, you can see there's a puck of coffee. Now this is a used puck, so I'll just knock that out. My knock filter. All right, it's going to be a little messy, but you can see there's this basket, and inside that basket you put, depends on the size of the basket. This is, I can't remember what size this is, but it takes about a 16 or 17 gram dose of coffee. All right, and then that goes ground into the basket, and then it's tamped with a tamper. It's pressed down into a evenly distributed puck of coffee. That goes up here. Hot water is forced through by a pump, and that pump will actually register here on this gauge. And this is kind of a cheap espresso machine. It doesn't tell me how many bars of pressure, but I think probably 7 or 8 bars is somewhere in that range up at the top. Right? So it's forcing hot water through that puck with a great deal of force, and it does so over really what the total time to pull a shot through here is, maybe 30 to 35 seconds at the most. All right, sometimes a little shorter, sometimes a little longer. All right, so what we need to do is we need to actually have that water go through that coffee, but we need to extract all the flavor components we want out of that coffee as quickly as possible within that short window of time that the water is applied. All right, and then we want a certain amount of volume of coffee to come out on the other end. If it's a 16 gram dose, then usually 32 grams out, or maybe up to 40 grams out at the most. All right, which is roughly 40 milliliters as well. All right. Now, in order to do that extraction, your coffee for espresso needs to be more porous, more soluble. All right, now these are LEDs, so I don't know how well that's going to work. But you can see, yeah, that's actually looks quite a bit lighter with the LEDs than it actually is. But you can see, like we showed you in Quarantine Coffee video number 2, that these beans have begun to expand. They're actually quite a bit larger than a coffee that was roasted maybe for pour over. Okay, and the reason for that is, again, the hot water is not going to be in contact with the coffee in that puck for very long. And so it needs to be very soluble so that we can extract as many components as possible. So how do you make a coffee more soluble so that we can extract more of those components in a quicker way like we need to with espresso? One way you can do that is to roast it darker. So to apply heat, maybe at the same rate as you would normally do, and then we want that bean to expand. You want all of the cellular structure of the bean to start to break down so that we can actually extract more components quicker. The problem, though, with just roasting it darker is, like we talked about in quarantine video number 2, it starts to burn actually the things that might taste good in that coffee. So we do tend to need to roast it a little bit darker, but the other way to accomplish this is actually to roast it longer. All right. Now the problem with roasting it longer is that it can actually end up tasting a little bit baked, I guess is the word, flat, and not have any kind of brightness or kind of joy to it, if you like. What we want a coffee that has a rich, developed flavor that's not too acidic, although you can actually pull a pretty acidic coffee as an espresso. It just might come out tasting more sour because you don't have time to really draw out all the components. Some will actually roast now for espresso that's actually fairly light. But what they do is we keep the bean temperature low, and we actually just drag out the roast longer so that those cellular walls can start to break down, but you're not actually burning or tipping the outside of the coffee so that it's charred, right? Because we still want good flavor, but we want it to be more porous. So a coffee roasted for espresso doesn't necessarily need to be too dark, but it does need to be more soluble. And that usually just means a longer roast, and maybe a little bit darker as well. And it's a balancing act. It's a dichotomy. So, coffee question number 3. See you next time.